So, full disclosure, I'm a millennial, and I'm going to be talking about whether or not we're ruining the workplace. So, maybe a little bit biased, but hang with me. I've got some research to back everything up. You've probably heard a lot about millennials, right? People talk about them in the media all the time, that we're lazy, we're entitled. As soon as we get into the workplace, we're expecting that promotion and that raise immediately, right? I have clients that are coming up to me all the time and asking, how can I attract a millennial? How can I retain them? Should we change our application process? You know, they don't have any attention span, we should make it shorter. I've actually had a client come up to me and say, we want to implement a Snapchat-like application where a millennial can upload a 10-second video application. That freaked me out. Sounds awful. I'm assuming most of you would agree with that. But the point is that there's just been a lot of focus on millennials and concern that they're going to come in, they're going to make some big changes. The older generations are looking at us and thinking that we're just really different than they are. So I want to start with a quote. This quote here is talking about how companies need to adjust to the new workforce, right? This lazy workforce. But what's interesting is that this quote was actually published in 1990. So this is not about millennials. These are the Gen Xers. They were also lazy. So what we're looking at here is that there's a trend. There's something going on that might be bigger than generational differences. As new generations are coming into the workplace or reaching adulthood, older generations are looking at them and judging them based on where they are in their lives. So I have one more quote to make this point. This one was actually published 200 years before the first one. If you remove the words romances, novels, and plays, put in TV, smartphones, social media, can't you imagine someone saying that today about our youth? That this free access of information is going to corrupt their minds? Really what I'm trying to say here is that there is something else going on that we need to think about what we're doing when we're judging new generations as they're coming in. We need to take a step back and imagine what we used to be like in those, well, not me, but the baby boomers and the Gen Xers need to be thinking about where they used to be in their lives when they were coming in and the types of stereotypes they were getting. So first, let's define a generation really briefly. It's a group of individuals that are roughly the same age, and they've gone through key historic events during major developmental times in their lives. So for millennials, you can imagine 9/11 would be one of those events. The baby boomers would be the JFK assassination. So they're kind of in their youth and adolescence when these major events are happening and they're experiencing them at the same time. So the generations we're going to be talking about today are the baby boomers. They're the individuals that were born right after World War II. You can imagine they're the ones that are bringing in like the hippie movement, et cetera. They're the first generation to have TVs in their house. The next generation are the Gen Xers. They were called the MTV generation, the latchkey kids. Then we've got the millennials. So these are the individuals that are really coming into the workplace now, been in the workplace for a few years. And we're the group that grew up with computers always being around and more accessibility to the internet and social media during our adolescence. And then the next group we're going to be judging soon, they're the Gen Zers. So these individuals have always had cell phones and smartphones, right? So they're a little bit different in that sense. Their experience might be a bit different. So I've been talking a lot about these stereotypes and how maybe this is a trend that keeps happening over and over again. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some writing by an economist, Dr. Alec R. Levinson, who discusses the natural work life cycle that everybody goes through. So when people start out in the workplace, like the millennials today, they're going through a steep learning curve. Tom actually made this point for me earlier about how we're focused on work. People that are just coming in, they really want to figure out what is their career, what does it look like, what do they want to do, is this industry right for them? They're just really focused on work and the workplace and their careers. As you progress to kind of that middle phase within the work life cycle, where the Gen Xers are today, they're a little bit more focused on work-life balance. So they have kids potentially, or aging parents. There's other things going on in their life that they want a little bit more stability and aren't looking to move continuously within their careers. Of course, generalization. And then we have the baby boomers, or the older generation within the workplace. So these individuals are really focusing on the nature of their retirement. What is that going to look like? When is it going to happen? So you can imagine that as you go through these different work-life cycles, your experience is very different, and your perspective on the workplace is really different. So the problem that we're seeing as we talk about new generations is that someone in that middle or later stage in their work-life cycle is judging those new millennials coming in and not taking into account where those people are coming from. The same happens in the reverse, right? Millennials might be coming in and judging baby boomers for not knowing how to use computers or whatever weird stereotype they have. So we really need to think about where we are in our life cycle and where the person is that we're looking at and we're talking to. So I'm going to be going through some research today, talking about, how does this life cycle work, and are there actual differences between millennials and everybody else? So the first question kind of goes back to that life cycle piece, that do millennials job hop more often? So are we seeing that they're actually leaving jobs more frequently than other generations? And that's true, they are. Millennials do tend to leave jobs more frequently, but they're no different than people that were in their 20s and 30s 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So they aren't different than other generations, they're just in a different life phase. So another thing we want to think about, though, is why are these millennials leaving? Are they leaving for different reasons than everybody else? So this is where we see that there's actually no difference. We see that the millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, they're all leaving for more money and to work in a more innovative work environment. So everybody still wants to work somewhere that's interesting. And we also hear a lot about millennials being less satisfied, less engaged on the job. At least that's what I hear. And we don't find that at all. So in our research, we see that millennials are leaving for reasons of dissatisfaction just as frequently as everybody else is. Another fun question that we looked at in the research is, do millennials expect more rewards? So a lot of people talk about millennials being the participation trophy generation, right? So we're the ones that want the pat on the back every time we do our jobs, not necessarily a good job, just doing it. Well, millennials don't actually expect more rewards. What's interesting is we see that Gen Xers expect more rewards, and baby boomers expect it the least. So everybody does expect rewards to some degree, of course, but those Gen Xers are really the most different than everybody else. But I'm going to make the same plug here. Is this a work-life phase issue? We don't know. One thing to think about when you're looking at generational research is that most of the time it's happening in a place and time, right? So it's happening today. We're looking at these generations, and we're saying the Gen Xers are so different than everyone else. But we don't have this longitudinal study to show you that over time, they continue to be these people that really want rewards. We have no idea. So maybe in a few years, millennials are going to want more rewards, and those Gen Zers are going to be at that lower rate. Another thing we hear a lot about with millennials is culture. So millennials really want to work at the cool culture, the Googles of the world. They want that casual environment, and they really care a lot about their culture of the organization that they're going to work in. What we found in our research is that that's actually not true. They don't care any more than anybody else does. Everyone cares. Everyone wants to be in a work environment where they're happy, they're fitting in, and it fits what they want, right? So when we ask millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers to rate the importance of culture over their job responsibilities and duties, everyone actually thinks it's a little bit more important what the culture is, which is really interesting. But when you think about it, if I'm a software engineer, my tasks are going to be the same across most organizations, right? I'll be doing similar things. So that focus on culture makes sense when you're making decisions around what organization you want to be a part of. So millennials being lazy. This is another hot topic. You saw that quote about Gen Xers also being lazy. What's really interesting is that I found a study that was talking about workaholics, or work martyrs is how they termed it. And all generations took a survey to determine whether or not they would be considered a work martyr. Millennials were work martyrs at a much higher rate than everyone else. And that's kind of makes sense. We talked about that work-life phase, right? They're starting out, they want to be seen as someone that's committed to the job. They are less likely to use their PTO. They feel guilty when they use PTO. They don't want to burden anybody else with their work, so they don't want to let go of it when they leave for PTO. So there's a lot of issues there with millennials that are just focusing on getting their work done, wanting to make a good impression, and becoming these work martyrs. The other generations, if you remember Gen Xers, they're kind of wanting that balance. So obviously they're not going to be work martyrs at the same rate. The baby boomers are focusing on retirement, probably not caring to be a work martyr anymore. So we also looked at leadership expectations. You know, I've had leaders that come up to me from different organizations and ask, how can I lead a millennial? How can I inspire a millennial? You can imagine my answer. There's really no difference in how you inspire one generation compared to the next. We actually have found that Gen Xers expect more in terms of face-to-face time with their leadership than millennials do. But I'd argue that this is that work-life phase again, right? Gen Xers have been in the organization a little bit longer or within their career a little bit longer. They might be higher level, so they have different type of leaders, probably leaders with fewer direct reports. So it makes sense that someone at that level might expect more in terms of face-to-face interaction. And as a millennial, maybe we just don't know what to expect yet, or because of the level of the organization, we just don't have that same expectation. But when it comes to what we want out of leaders, everyone's the same. Everyone rates, we want ethical and fair leaders in our organizations. Makes sense. That's the most important attribute that was rated across all generations. We also looked at professional development. So we hear that millennials want everything handed to them on a silver platter, right? That hand-holding right off the bat. We found that actually all generations believe that professional development is their own responsibility. So regardless of what generation you're in, you want to own your development, and you think that that's the only way you're going to get your development, is if you take charge. Another interesting thing that we found is that millennials actually prefer face-to-face training, just like everybody else. So millennials have this stereotype of being, more computer savvy, maybe wanting to be on the computer more, or being more comfortable in that situation. When it comes to actual training, they really prefer face-to-face, just like every other generation does. And the last thing we looked at was career goals. So we hear a lot about millennials, wanting to make an impact on the world and these kind of high, lofty ideas. What we found in terms of career goals is that the majority, the highest percentage of all generations want to make a positive impact on their organization. But you can see that's only a quarter of the population that's saying that. So really, as a psychologist, I'm going to tell you, individual differences matter a lot more. So there's so much variability in what people say in terms of their career goals, and it doesn't matter what generation you're in. That variability is all based on the individual and who you are, where you're coming from, and those types of variables, personality. So again, we're not really seeing any differences by generation. When it comes to generational differences, I'm going to tell everybody to not think about it so much. Don't judge people based on where they're coming from generationally. Don't think about their age. Think about who they are as a person. Individual differences really impact work attitudes and work behaviors a lot more than these generational differences do. And I think it's really dangerous when organizations are trying to create programs that are geared towards just the millennials. And I hear that so often. I mostly discourage it, of course, but I'm sure people still go and do these things. And what you're doing is you're separating this group of people and you're alienating them from everybody else. Instead of trying to make all of your employees happy, trying to make your application process easy for everybody, you're really focusing too much energy and spending too much time on just this one group and this one population. So just remember, we're no different than you guys. So just treat us the same, that's all we want. All right, thank you.